Antarctica and the polar regions in general are just very remote parts of the world that are very difficult to access, so it's just very data limited regions of the world. There's a lot we still need to know about them. They're also the fastest changing parts of the world, so there's a importance to understand these ecosystems, but how to do that is also very challenging. Fjord Phyto is a citizen science project that takes place down in Antarctica in the polar regions. And it's in partnership with researchers, so with the Vernay Lab and myself and a student in Argentina, partnering with tour vessels down in Antarctica.
Citizen science can mean a lot of different things, but fundamentally it is a research project that involves science and people that don't necessarily have a scientific background are helping to collect an increased number of data points.
Before, there was no citizen science per se. For me, it only started 4 years ago. We started teaming up with the tourist ships and teaching them how to collect samples so that then we will have now samples collected in times that we are not there. And the project that Allison has, for example, on phytoplankton in the Antarctic Peninsula would not have happened without the citizen science.
Phytoplankton are, I think, amazing little creatures that we don't even really know much about in the sense of your daily life. So they live in the ocean. They are actually contributing to global processes. So in one drop of seawater, you might not think there's much going on, but when you look under the microscope, there's all of these organisms, and together they're contributing over 50% of Earth's oxygen, so that's more than the plants and trees on land combined. They're regulating carbon that moves from the atmosphere down into the ocean's depths. And so I think when you start to realize there's these little single-celled underdogs making these huge things happen in Earth as a whole and giving life to life is amazing. So if you break up the word, it's phyto and plankton. They're both derived from Greek, so phyto is just plant, and plankton is a drifter, so they're like little tiny plant-like organisms drifting in the oceans. They're also just incredibly intriguing to me because they're ancient. They've been around for hundreds of millions of years.
The phytoplankton is the most important thing in the world. The same as humans depend on crops, the phytoplankton is also the food for all the animals that live in the ocean. So you have the phytoplankton that is only one cell is being eaten by another little animal, and that little animal is eaten by an animal that is a little bit bigger until we'll get all the way to seals and penguins and whales. So we call that the food web, the marine food web, and the phytoplankton is the one that makes it possible. Without it, none of these beautiful animals that we love would live.
So we get a group of excited people to come in the boat with us. We call it the science boat. And while we're out there, each little task gets delegated to a different participant. So somebody, of course, has to record the data. That's very important, to be the scribe. Another person will drop a Secchi disc overboard to get a quick visual of when this disc disappears. That's kind of when the light levels are low, and we call the Secchi depth. Another person can drop an instrument overboard that measures the saltiness and the temperature of the water from the surface all the way down to 60 meters depth. And that tells us what might be changing in the marine environment, and if phytoplankton have a specific preference for where they're living, then that's important information. And then we'll take, just dip a bottle overboard so we can get a volume of water and be able to count how many phytoplankton we see in there. And then we also take the net and we tow it behind the boat to concentrate the phytoplankton, and then this gets preserved onto a filter so we can have enough material to extract the genetic information from the organisms. We always say that scientists need to get out of the ivory tower and interact more with the public. If science starts with observation, then people can help with science through observations, and you just have more eyes on the ground, collecting more information about how the world works. For Antarctica specifically, I was really struck by the fact that in the summer you have maybe 5,000 researchers from all the nations working in Antarctica, But then on the peninsula, you have this tourism industry that's growing with over 59,000 visitors coming. So that's more than 10-to-1 ratio of visitors to scientists. So for me personally, that was my motivation to get that community of people involved in the polar research that's going on down there, because Antarctica is preserved as a place for peace and science.
Antarctica is the only continent in the planet that has an Antarctic treaty. It doesn't have a government. It doesn't have a passport. It doesn't have a nationality. Everyone that is going to respect the place is entitled to go there. So in a certain way, this is utopia. This is what we all aspire to. That many countries come together, they agree on how to interact. So that international sense of community, it has that sense that it can go beyond our human limitations and create something better for humanity.
The best part about participating in citizen science is having the opportunity to share this rare facet of science with someone that is seeing the project almost with childlike eyes, things for the first time, and it puts everything into a different perspective. And as a scientist, it makes you question things differently because you're being confronted with questions or thoughts that are more often than not taken for granted. A project like Fjord Phyto brings this more profound experience to the forefront of how the world is dependent on these organisms that aren't typically studied or given a lot of spotlight time. I love getting more people involved with citizen science because I like to think that it starts this spark of curiosity in their world that otherwise wouldn't be there. And the more sparks that you have, eventually it will add up into potentially a roaring fire that can really drive actionable change. Because at the end of the day, people care about what they know, and if they don't know about it, then they probably won't care.